Hello and welcome to this episode of Conscious Design. I'm Jan Peterman, your host and author of the Conscious Design book. I'm here with Jan Beranek, founder and CEO of U+. They work with Fortune 1000 companies with over 100 digital businesses with a combined valuation of $1 billion that they've launched. He also mentors with Google in the Bay Area. And we're here to talk about how to make an impact, startups, and making the world a better place. So welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thanks, Ian. Good to be here.
Awesome. So starting with, everybody loves a good backstory. So you work in the startup space and you work with a lot, having launched over 100. That is quite a few digital businesses to launch. How did you get to where you're at, where working with startups is now your life? You do that day in and day out now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I started coding and designing when I was 14, and that's started there. I founded U+ when I was 20, while I was still at the university, and it was always a vessel for learning for me. It was also around that time when the marketing agencies were discovering that digital is a big portion of the mix that now is a given, but back then nobody really understood it. So it was people like me very early on that had comparatively limited knowledge with the rest of what was going on in the mix, but I was the one that could get things done, and that's how U+ originally started. But we wanted to move to sort of longer projects with more impact, and that's how we got to corporate innovation. And then I was the first one, and then 100 projects later, 100 businesses later. There's a big process, an international team, there's good results behind it. So it was a sort of path of discovery, I would say, and learning. And I always say that I started as a designer and developer and became a CEO by accident.
Well, it sounds like a happy accident though, because you're able to do a lot more from where you're at than if you're just a developer. Along the way, you've said this was a learning process, right? So what are some of the things that on your journey, you mentioned wanting to work with projects that have more impact? What started you along that journey? Because not everyone decides, oh, I want to do more impact. Sometimes just, oh, we want to do bigger projects because it's easier to do one project over a couple of years than a bunch of tiny ones. So what did really drove you towards that impact side?
Well, if we define impact as helping people and positively, that's I think that came a little bit later. The impact on seeing that the work that you're doing is a little bit more long lasting, I think just comes with experience and with the time that you do in a particular industry, right? With the marketing stuff that we did early on, it was let's do a landing page here, let's do a couple of banners there, and then 3 months nobody knows what it was, right? So it's good for learning, but it's not good for looking behind at what you've done and seeing, okay, this is actually how I've improved here, this is what I've done. So I wanted to see the impact of the work that we were doing on more capitalist things like bottom line and things like that, and improvement in efficiency, etc. And I knew that it could be done through software, right? It's only later in the past couple of years where we've achieved a lot, and I look back and saw back then it was maybe 60, 70 business that we brought to market, and the $1 billion valuation that we sort of calculated. And I said, well, how are we helping the planet this way? And if I was frank with myself, I was like, I'm not sure that we're helping in a super positive, long lasting way. We're definitely helping our customers achieve their business goals. But how can we set up the environment so that the business goals are aligned more with where we need to be as a society, right?
And as you began to make that shift, right, you're already proven, oh, we can create things that make sense from a business standpoint. You're making profit, obviously with billion valuation, it's measurable in success in that way. What were some of the things that was there resistance to shifting, or how did you start to shift over and keep it making sense for business to say, okay, yeah, let's make you profits and let's see how we can do something that improves the planet in some way.
Right. So I think it's an unanswered question still. What is the best model for it? There are many
Right.
different organizations like the Grameen organizations or Unisocial Business. But for us, it was really um, right now we're starting to get more requests for things like that. But from my side, it was a discovery of when you say impact, impact is a super loaded word. You never know what it means, right?
Right.
So trying to really understand. I spent 9 months with two partners trying to understand what the space even looks like. Spoke with um, impact investors here in the Bay Area, in Sweden, pretty much all around the world, and trying to define what is impact, right? What is impact for them, and for each one, it was something very different. But I think we found a good definition that I liked, which was as a social impact business that an impact investor would invest in is such that for every unit of profit generates a unit of impact, and the CEO cannot decide to make a trade-off between those, right? Because as long as you can, as long as they can, that's it's not, in tough times it's going to be profit because that's what's keeps you afloat, right?
Right.
So and I've started thinking about, okay, so how can we infuse the business models that we're trying to build with these large organizations with this sort of a thinking, so that automatically, when it becomes successful, it automatically becomes impactful, right? So we've ultimately written a about 50-page report on how startups, how tech startups can be scalable, profitable, but also impactful and contribute to solving not only the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that we now know that are not going to be met, right, by 2030. So we'll need new ones. So we also took a stab at like, what are the grand challenges of the 21st century that need to be solved, right? And how can startups do it? So that was published, I think, a year and a half ago. And since then, one of my partners founded a venture fund. With the other one, we created a platform called Moonshot Platform that helps exactly these types of startups with connections to either mentors, investors, other, hiring, things like that. And in terms of U+, we're starting to implement it into the methodology that we use to find and achieve product market fit and scale for these businesses that we bring to markets.
Got it. And so you, like what you pointed out, right? It's not, you don't have to have the trade-off. And that's something when I talk to companies and startups, there's still a pretty strong belief that it's somewhat of an either or process, right? You have to somehow trade off. And what you've been doing and what you've been seeing and how you communicate with people, what are the things that you use or can show people to say that, basically prove the whole, you don't have to have the trade-off. We can actually have a positive impact and still be profitable. How do you navigate that kind of conversation of helping people get on board and understand that?
Right. So I think there are two or three aspects to it. One aspect that certainly pushed this forward is, I think, the top 100 companies in the US or globally signed a pledge that business of business is no longer only business, right? As I think 2018 or 2019, Apple and such companies signed that business of business is yes, to be profitable, but also to positively impact the communities that you're a part of, global society in general, right? So that's a massive shift, because for the longest time, it's been just more money, right? And that's no longer the case, right? And the biggest companies are already subscribed to it. So that's that part. And let's say top down, and the bottom up part of that is, well, you have millennials. I'm a millennial. You have people who come to the workforce and they want to see purpose in what they're doing, right? And they want to see that what the effort that they put into the work has some sort of a positive outcome apart from making money, right? So it's demand bottom up. And I think the third portion is also, people are now realizing there's enough, like we no longer can be complacent with the climate change, and people see that it's, there are, secondary or secondhand effects to just focusing on making money and not taking into account either of the other humans around or just the planet in general. Right? So So there are factors that, independent of what I want to do, I think are happening in the world and making the path easier for everyone.
Yeah, so you mentioned too both the environmental impact, but also the social impact.
Mhm.
Do you, in those conversations, do you usually find that it's both? So it's really approaching and looking at both kind of impacts, your fellow humans and the environment, or is there more focus or leaning one way or the other, and in the conversations you've been having?
Everybody has their own view from their own business model, right? So if you ask the impact investors here in the Bay Area, at least the ones that I spoke with, they said, well, what does it mean for you? And they said, well, it means half an FTE that we need to add. That sort of hits our bottom line, but that's the person who helps the startups with setting the right metrics, that sort of does the reporting for us and for them, so that we know that actually they're sticking to their mission, because a lot of these impact investors also have mission drift clauses that, like, if we invest into you because you're focusing on solar panels, if you're going to focus on some nonsense like clean coal or something, we're not going to invest in you, right? And we're going to pull the money. So there's an impact, like from their side. That's the that's how they see the impact, and for them it's relatively, I would say, irrelevant if they're sort of general enough, if it's social or environmental. It's pick a couple metrics, one or a couple metrics that you can measure, that you can show that you have impact. So it could be local community job generation, it could be tons of CO2 not in the atmosphere, right? It could be things like that, but things that you can report against. Because if you're trying to, there are multiple different ways of calculating the abstract impact, right? But those are very academic, right? So everybody's just trying to focus on something that they can measure, that's tangible, where you can see the difference, right? So, but if you look at, for example, human health, and you look at clean air as one of the aspects, well, there's going to be an environmental, piece to it, but also social impact, right? Because if I was born in the most polluted part of Central Europe, because we're downwind in a ditch from a massive ironworks, right? I got it good, but now the kids that were born after me, 99% of them have asthma. So what is the efficiency toll for these people later in their life? There's multiple different aspects, right? So you have somebody polluting here, you don't have clean air. Maybe these people could have been athletes, they aren't. They could have, performed other feats of even, they put their brain into work, and they can for various reasons, right? So I think rarely it is just one dimension that you look at.
Yeah, that's been when you actually start to think about impact, you can't really pull apart. At least I don't think you can really pull apart those two impacts, environmental and social, and things like that, because it's so, once you dive in, you realize it's all just dominoes.
Yep.
And messing with one, always there's something else that gets triggered when you start positively or negatively impacting them.
So I agree, and I think that then just picking a couple metrics that are tangible, that you can report against and can be the North Star for your team and decisions that you make internally, like for example B Corps have to. I think that's a good start, right? And then you have companies, right? I apologize, forgot the name. There's a company that does like a large property management, like in Manhattan. It's a tech platform that switches on and off lights and heating in areas where people aren't, right, during the night, etc. And you have a couple massive skyscrapers that are in the system. Suddenly there's a peaker plant in New Jersey that doesn't have to turn on, right? So it's a positive outcome of implementing this technology, that you're saving CO2 that doesn't have to go into the atmosphere, right? So there are things like that you wouldn't think that have positive impact, but if they're part of the mission of that company, then you're going to make decisions and you're going to reach out to those people, et cetera. And I think in this example, again, apologize, I forgot what the name of the company is. The peaker plant actually reached out to them because they saw a difference.
Hey, it's Ian here. So glad you're enjoying this episode of Conscious Design. If you want the full scoop on conscious design, what it is, how we do it, how you can do it, then check out our book. We wrote it so creative entrepreneurs like you can code social and environmental responsibility right into your brand's DNA. You can download the first chapter for free. Link is in the description. Enjoy the rest of the episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Wow. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting. I talked to a couple of people recently, and the idea of efficiency is also usually tied with sustainability in one way or another. Because there's a lot of like that example, you're being more efficient with your building management. You're not paying for lighting and heating and cooling and those things if no one's there, which is financially efficient, it's energy efficient, and thereby it's also actually being environmentally efficient if you're not kicking on an extra little plant to pump out energy for it. When you're looking at software, because software is your realm, what are the things? What are the top things that you can look at as a software company as in terms of being more sustainable, improving your impact? What are the things that if you were to look at a new startup, what are the top things you say? These are the areas that software can really have this impact. And I ask because in the tangible world that I live in, it's really easy. Well, don't use plastic, use bamboo. Don't we can material swap out is kind of a really easy thing for people to grasp. But on the software side, it's a little bit more etheric for some people. So how do you ground that into what real impact can be with software?
I think the motivations of a startup in terms of the immediate sustainability, or let's say, if you connect it to climate change, that would be things like you keep your servers running all the time, right? But the motivation of them is already connected because everything is now in the cloud, right? So, and you pay per use, right? So you're trying to minimize the use while maximizing the output that you're getting out of it, right? So that's a good lever that those startups have. I'm not sure if there's anything else, like from a software perspective. Is a good question. Maybe I'm just ignorant on this, but the way we're looking at that piece is it's more, we have a global workforce. We have 23, maybe now more nationalities in about 100-person team, and we're generating profit in many different parts of the world through their work. So how can we stay true to being a good global citizen and reinvesting into those areas, right? So we're looking at internally, it's from an accounting and financial perspective, it's relatively complicated. So we've been talking about it for a year and we still haven't implemented it, but the model is still the same. How can we redistribute parts of the profit that are generated from those areas into local communities in those areas, and have the people that are from there have a say in where it goes, but also so it's aligned with the company ideals, right? So now when you have 23 nationalities, we have Canadians, Americans, we have all sorts of Europeans, we have people from Africa, from the Middle East, so we have people in Russia. So how do you align on a set of similar causes that you can apply across, right? So that you're force for good. So that's what we're thinking about. Basically, a profit redistribution scheme into local communities, where people have a say in where it goes, but it's part of a one direction for the whole company. So that's how we're thinking about it. So more social engineering rather than software engineering in this case.
I love that idea because that's so many companies these days aren't just one. The kind of the day where you have an office in one city and you just that's your company, that's kind of dead in a lot of ways. So I think that's a great idea to be able to help it be local while still being at such a distributed 23 nationalities. That's a lot of countries and places to be touching, but to impact.
And there's anecdotal financial sense to this, right? So it's not like you cut, let's say, 10% of your profit away. The financial sense behind it is, if you look at the most performing companies, those are the ones that have the most engaged employees. There's something like a 17% difference against peers if you have higher, like the highest engaged employees, like 99% percentile engaged employees versus not, right? So if it's 17% more 17% higher shareholder return because more engaged employees. So then the question should be, so well, how do you engage employees? Well, engaged employees are the ones that find purpose in the work that they do, right? And show up and want to do it, right? So, and one of the best ways to have them engaged and have them connected to the purpose of what they do is to have positive impact on the communities that they live in, right? So it can be that
Right.
force of good there, right? So if you follow the chain of logic, I don't know, there's probably some ratios there that maybe doesn't work out, but there's financial logic as well, that from a very capitalist perspective, yes, you cut away maybe 10% of your profit, but there's an investment that you're making that can return 17%, right? So that's how I turn capitalists on this idea. It's like,
I mean, anybody that if you spend $10 and get 17 back, that's a pretty good deal. So
yep.
People do spend 10 and get 11 back and call that winning. So better returns than a lot of other things. So that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, the whole efficiency part, that's a huge thing, right? The engaged, and like you said, especially with millennials and the workforce age is shifting. The generation is moving. So
Yep.
most of the workforce, there's a lot of retiring. There's even more retiring through the pandemic. And now we have a larger workforce that really does care about these things and votes by where they work.
It's starting to. Well, I've done research, right, on this on the makeup of companies, and I've found that there's literally a quote from me now in a book about I don't know if it's already published or not, from people from professors at Berkeley, because I spoke with them and I told them this, like our society is mentally ill people leading people who don't want to be there, which is based on couple stats, and one of them is 75% of top executives and founders have mental health issues. Like they just do. I had a panic attack 3 years ago. That's a relatively strong one. And I started talking to my friends who are exactly the sort of people, and they're like, "Oh, you need these pills, or I'm going to give you another." Like, oh, what the hell? Like that shouldn't be a standard, right? And then you have over 50% of your workforce is disengaged at work. That's U.S. numbers. Right. So again, you have
that's a lot.
3/4 of the people who lead others have mental health issues. And then half of the other ones don't want to be there. So that's not a great society to live in, right? So how can you fix that? And how can you, like, that's my motivation, right? How can you fix this? How can you create a model that works better and is positive and turns this into some, somewhat more manageable ratios than 3/4 and 50%. Of course, the topic is executives, there's some self-selection and proclivity to psychological problems, as the research suggests.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how much of it is you start with it, or if you get it from being an executive for too long, it just it gives you so much stress. That would be an interesting study.
I think the research that I've seen shows that that's a type of people that are driven for various reasons, right? But also that drive, that's it has to be counterbalanced somewhere else, right? So typically more sensitive, for various other reasons, right? So that's a given, and it's people should talk about it a little bit more. That's what it is.
Yeah, we don't really talk about that too much. We just look at the numbers and move on, rather than looking at it. Well, maybe that'll be another startup that can help that issue.
There are many startups that do like SaaS platforms that offer therapy, like video call therapy, right now, and they skyrocketed during COVID, right? Because people stopped having social interactions, and it's in a way democratizing the part of the performance coaching that the top people could afford, right? So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And during during the pandemic, we actually got a puppy and went to go get some training for it, and they were booked out because they were only dealing with high stress dogs. They were only accepting high need dogs, and so talking to other people like, well, if the dogs are stressed out, imagine how imagine how the people are doing right now.
Right.
So
Right.
that was a whole level of stress, but I think that's a good, what you mentioned is coming out of it is democratizing and helping have those resources that weren't really available en masse,
Mhm.
that now, nothing like forcing everyone to stay at home. Now we figure out how to do it through Zoom, lots of Zoom calls, which is great. Um, so looking forward, right? You've done 100 companies, you've launched them, valuation over $1 billion. What are you looking forward to? What areas are you looking to make a really big impact in? There's a long list, but
Mhm.
what are the areas that you are really wanting to focus in and work on?
Yeah, two of them. One, the model that we have right now, which is super high quality niche offering that brings new businesses to market for large organizations that typically have operators, not innovators. There's mismatch in skill set. There's mismatch in experience, and there's lack of sort of framework of how to do this. But it's one of those COVID again accelerated. There's a need to launch things like this, right? There's a mismatch of the teams that you have internally, right? So scaling that, I think that's a relatively straightforward thing for us to focus on and do it as quickly as possible because the need is only growing.
Right.
And the other thing is just launching this impact model that I described, right? So, and I would be, the reason why I'm mentioning it even here is like happy to work with anybody who wants to implement it in their company. I was even considering doing it as a PhD, sort of to understand what are all the levers in the model, right? So how to get the biggest impact, how you get the biggest engagement of your of the people internally. Is there a measurable financial gain for the company, or what is the financial impact on the company, right? Those, the 17 minus 10 numbers. So I think we're a couple of months from launching that, once we figure out all the financial aspects of it, and then trying to scale that, right? Because there's so many positives if we're in a service industry, right? Or service agency business, right? So we can there's a good feeling to be able to say, well, this person in this particular country invested in gender equality or mental health through the money that they helped make, and that's good for them, but it's also good for the customer that works with us, because then we can come to them and say, hey, because you work with us, this is what happens, right? So there's great PR for them. So there should be a positive wave of this, across
Right.
where in the places that we can touch. So it makes sense to scale that impact by scaling the company, right? So that's sort of my way of connecting our profit to the impact that we can make, which is relatively hard in an agency,
Right.
model, right? So
Yeah.
I take it as a first step, and we'll see what we learn once it's running.
Yeah, we'll have to talk because we have a couple teams, and yeah, it's a complicated. The accountants don't like it when you try
Yep.
to do something like that. But I don't know any easier way to spread out, what profits you make, especially when you're in such a distributed team. And you're in way more countries than we are, but still, it's a interesting problem. I look forward to seeing how you guys implement it. Love to
Let's do it.
love to love to see how that goes, and how you convince the accountants to be okay with it, other than just paying them more hours. So
That I guess that should be a big part of the efficiency calculation as well.
yeah, let's see how to do it with less accounting hours. That would be
Yes.
that would be ideal, for sure. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking your time to talk about what you're doing, what you're able to do. And if anybody wants to reach out and they are wanting to launch another startup that is going to have a positive impact, what's the best way to get a hold of you and U Plus and start that conversation and making a difference?
just reach out on LinkedIn or reach out on email. My email is Jan, my name, Jan@u.plus, literally letter u.plus. And that's the web address as well, u.plus. You can get in touch there, and happy to work either on a project, getting a business out with you, or focusing on the impact piece as well, to implement it in your organization. Something that I'm focused on.
Fantastic. Well, I will make sure there's links in the description for anybody who wants to just click on something. And yeah, really appreciate you taking your time. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you as well. Thank you for inviting me.